Hi, folks. It's Mike Hettinger. I'm the director of the Public Sector Innovation Group here at SIIA. I wanted to go ahead and get the webinar started. I know we have a few people who are still going to be joining us here over the next few minutes as we get started. Can I get something to show that you folks can hear me? Maybe a hand raise or a thumbs up?
I can hear you, Mike.
Okay. I got some hand raised as well. Okay. Let me go ahead and before we get too far into this, do some initial housekeeping here. Just so everyone knows, all phones right now are set on mute. As we go through the webinar, if you have questions, use the chat Q&A box, which will allow you to submit your questions. And all of us who are presenting today have access to that Q&A box, so we can see what we're doing and answer those questions as we go through. What we've tried to do today, which may be a little different than some webinars, is to not use a lot of slides among the presenters. We wanted to have a conversation about the things we want to talk about today from an IT priority standpoint and IT prediction standpoint for the federal market in 2013. So as we move through it, you'll notice there aren't a lot of slides to look at. But there is I have a slide up on the screen now about how you use the chat box. And so again, if you have questions, go ahead and click on that, and we'll be able to see those and answer the questions as we go through. I want to also highlight a couple things that are coming up from a schedule standpoint. Probably most urgently and importantly for us in the federal market, we have our annual Cloud Gov Conference, which is a co-production of SIIA and Deltek, coming up on February 12th, which is next Tuesday, at the Westin in Washington, D.C. We've put together a great lineup of keynote speakers as well as panel discussions. We were very excited last week to confirm Steve Van Rokel, who's of course the federal CIO, to serve as the opening keynote. He'll be followed by David DeVries, who's the Deputy CIO for Information Enterprise at DoD, who'll talk about some of the things that DoD is working on. And then we have an afternoon session that will be teed up by Congressman Darrell Issa, who's chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, who will be talking about his proposal to reform federal IT purchasing. So that's an exciting one. For those of you who are joining us on this that aren't registered, we'd love for you to come and spread the word. Get it out to as many folks as you can. We really do have a great lineup. In addition to the keynote speakers, we'll be delving into Fedramp, obviously a hot issue here in town, the convergence of cloud and data, and we'll be focused a lot on procurement policy. That's one housekeeping matter that I wanted to make sure folks were aware of. The other is our annual ISV conference, all about the cloud, which takes place at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, May 7th through 9th. You'll see on your screen we've got an open call for speakers that ends this Friday, February 8th. So if you have folks who you think would make good speakers, please let us know that. And there's early bird registration ongoing right now, which is good through April 8th. It's an exciting conference and a great way to form partnerships, close deals, open deals, make contacts. So Rihanna Collier, who runs our software division, is the contact there. So please reach out to her or check our website if you have any questions or interest in all about the cloud this year. Let me move quickly to the three panelists that we have today, and most of them really don't need much introduction in this marketplace, but I'm going to do it very very quickly here so that you folks on the other end have an idea who is speaking. Susie Adams, I'm sure many of you know, is the Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft in their Federal Sales Division. Susie's very active in this market, spends a lot of time following trends and making predictions on what's happening in IT. I see her just about every meeting I go to, so I know she's out there on the circuit, and we're glad to have her here. She'll also be moderating a panel at CloudGov next week. Kevin Plexico is the Vice President for Federal Information Solutions at Deltek Information Solutions, and is, again, a frequent speaker at a number of industry events, and one who really truly understands the federal market and what's happening from an opportunity standpoint and from a trends and policy standpoint. So we're excited to have Kevin with us as well. Mike Binko is a member both of our software board here at SIIA as well as our public sector board. He's the president and CEO of CloudTrack, but very active in the federal market. So we're excited to have Mike as well. I think that is about what I wanted to do. I put a slide up on how to use the chat box again, and we'll leave that up as we move through this. But I wanted to open it up to the panel for discussion. And like I said, we're not using slides, so we're going to try to have a fairly open discussion. Let me open the webinar with sort of a big picture question, and please, all of you feel free to jump in as you see fit. We obviously had what some would call a status quo election. There are changes within some of the committees on the Hill, but for the most part in the IT space, from a federal standpoint, the same folks that have been pushing Obama's IT agenda are the same folks that were there during the first term. Obviously, I think we'll see some changes that goes forward, but what do you think going forward will be some of the key initiatives that will either be continued from Obama's first term, or new things that we should expect to see on the horizon as it relates to President Obama's IT agenda?
Well, this is Kevin Plexico. I'll take a first bite at the apple. And I think from my perspective, when we've seen election cycles like this in the past, it seems that the first administration, the first 4 years, is really about trying to lay the foundation and get things kind of in a certain direction. And the second 4 years is more about executing on the first. And so I do think that we're going to see a lot of pressure on agencies, and I think that's part of the reason we're starting to see the acquisition reform legislation start to get attention as well. We're starting to see more pressure being put on agencies to implement the policies that were put forward. But I think the challenge that the Obama administration has in this cycle is that they don't really have the legislative support from a budgeting point of view. And I think that's going to be one of the key hindrances to agencies making progress, is really the lack of clarity around their budget latitude and capability in terms of making investments that have longer term gains.
Okay, others want to weigh in on that?
Sure, this is Mike Binko. A lot of perspectives come into play, and I think where you look at where industry, many of us on this panel are kind of the service providers that are going to be tasked with not only addressing some of the guidelines that are being put in place for whether it be cloud or big data or mobility or virtualization. Agencies are under certain mandates to kind of move in certain directions, or at least for efficiency's sake, or utilizing innovation and getting costs lower and doing more with less. But I think it really is something where it's kind of like the perfect storm, where there's in an election year where a lot of mandates in the first term have been put in place. To Kevin's point, the implementation now is where the rubber's hitting the road, and the agencies are really, probably in the next couple of years, going to be tasked with identifying how are they moving to cloud, and not only doing it under the mandate, but also evaluating it. And I think with the FITARA legislation that's coming out, and centers of excellence and commodity IT approaches are somewhat creative and unique, but it's also going to give a little bit more pause to the agencies at a difficult time where procurement avenues are even somewhat constricted right now, given the overall budget environment. And from an industry perspective, we're kind of looking at the second half of the fiscal year for the federal government as a real exciting and interesting timetable that's going to unfold as we move into February, March, and April. But I think as industry, we need to be prepared to be nimble and address some of the needs and challenges. But then also the agencies, I think they have a rare opportunity to really look at innovations more closely than they ever have, and almost looking for new solutions to existing and old problems.
Okay. Susie, did you have any specific comment on that, or if not, I have a follow-up question I'll ask. Okay, I think we may have Susie muted at this point, but if she wants to come back to it, we can certainly do that. So, Mike Binko, you mentioned the procurement environment, and we know that agencies are at this point being asked to do more with less. We hear that all the time. Obviously, IT is an enabler of efficiency, and that's the way we like to look at it. But Mike and Kevin and Susie, if we get your phone situation squared away, I'd love to get your sense of, what are we seeing in that procurement environment? Are there less opportunities? Are there more opportunities? Are they different opportunities? We know there are changes, and we know money is going to be tight. With what I've heard referred to as a three-cliff circus, the sequestration, which has now been kicked down the road a little bit, the expiration of the continuing resolution, and the debt ceiling, which has been kicked down the road a little bit as well. But these are things that are obviously affecting IT spending. So give me your sense of what that procurement environment looks like right now, and how we expect to shake through the next few months.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting times, as I pointed out earlier. This is Binko again. But I think there is an opportunity where really, to answer all of the questions that you just asked, unfortunately the answer is yes. There's going to be, somewhat of constriction on certain procurements, maybe through certain vehicles and contracts or certain types of procurements. But I think with, the FTAR legislation possibly, really opening up some avenues with the centers of excellence, and then a refocusing on commodity IT approach is creative and progressive. And I think that could open up a lot of avenues, not only for the agencies, but vendors that have creative solutions to get them out there. But really, what we see unfolding is a perspective of prove it. And whether you're a federal agency CIO or in the directorate under the CIO, if the procurement reform opens up and kind of Klinger-Cohen is kind of rejostled with a little bit more of the fiduciary responsibility in the hands of CIOs, they're going to be required to kind of put metrics of evaluation in place that weren't necessarily required before. But I think that's a good thing. And I think the agencies being, in more direct control in the CIO camp on outcomes, from evaluating a progression towards new technologies or leveraging IT in new ways to measuring the results is a very fundamental shift in the approach to government IT. It's refreshing on one part, it's challenging on another side. As vendors, we need to figure out how we play in this space. And one topic I'm sure we'll hit on later is the fact that IT, whether it be in the commercial sector or the federal or state and local government, is much more of an ecosystem play now than it ever has been. And we've had to adjust our business with partnering on a lot of fronts just to make sure our services work with others out of the box. But I think agencies are also going to have to realize they're not going to get everything they need from one vendor or one integrator like they may have been able to do in the past. It's going to have to be more of a team approach and ecosystem.
Okay.
This is Susie. Can you guys hear me now?
We can. Go ahead, Susie.
Yay!
To have you back.
No, so I think it is. I think we're I guess I'm seeing the pace of IT or just the change in how government agencies or federal agencies are approaching IT is dramatically different. At least it seems to me that the atmosphere is dramatically different. And a lot of that, I mean, it is extremely refreshing in many ways, especially as a taxpayer. But even as even as an employee at Microsoft, I mean, we're seeing agencies do things like look for shared services, collaboration between the agencies, and collaboration with agencies and the private sector, I think, is unprecedented. Things that we really haven't seen in the past. I think it is refreshing to the CIOs, right, and the agencies themselves. But I think a really good example of that is just the pace at which the digital government strategy is really kind of gaining momentum here. And if you look at just the things that have happened in the milestones that the agencies have met thus far with that, anytime, anywhere, any device kind of improving citizen services while also improving, right, the capabilities of the information workers in the federal government, all while decreasing costs, right, of running large data centers with the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative, and then the pace of adoption of cloud. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, I would have never guessed that we would see the pace of adoption of cloud services, especially email and calendar, at the rate that it is today, with some of the large, very large cabinet, cabinet level agencies. And so, I think we are seeing a huge reform. I mean, just from a Microsoft perspective, we're seeing, in the Department of Defense, we had the Army, Air Force, and DISA come and work with us on a consolidated enterprise agreement, which is the first that we've never ever done that with the Department of Defense, or much less across civilian agencies. And so I think it is refreshing, and it is going to mean that we're going to need to collaborate, and it's between vendors and between agencies and the private sector.
Okay, thanks, Susie, for those comments. Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to add about what you all are seeing as an analyst about the procurement environment?
Sure. So I mean, I think the key thing I see is that not much happens in government without a crisis, and we wouldn't have had the Department of Homeland Security without September 11th, and we wouldn't have had economic stimulus without the economic crisis. And I feel like we're in a budget crisis where agencies recognize that their dollars are going down, or will be going down for the next couple of years probably, and they have to do things differently. And I think that really is a force function to make them rethink things and some of their decisions that when times are good and next year's budget is going to be more than this year's budget, you tend not to get caught up into cost-saving activities. And that really does lend itself to cloud adoption, data center consolidation, things that are initiatives that probably could and should have happened years ago, that are really driving agencies to reconsider their thought process around that. But I still think there are challenges in that, and that sometimes you have to spend some money up front to make some money and save some money on the back end. And the budget uncertainty that we have makes it very difficult to do that. So I think it's going to be hit and miss. I think you're going to see smaller activities, easier transitions like the one Susie mentioned, mail and calendar, obviously a lot easier to consolidate than things like data centers, when you have large data centers with large amounts of equipment and legacy systems, things like that really make it challenging, and you need a big investment up front to really make a move to cut the cost long term. So those are, I think there's some opportunities in this environment, but there's also still some challenges, of course.
Okay, I think that's very helpful. Let me, unless anybody has any further comment, let me jump to a couple of the topics that I think are a little more specific in nature, but certainly things that we want to address both on this webinar today, and then we'll be talking a lot about at CloudGov next week as well. One of the hottest topics, I think, over the last 18 months or so has been security. And in saying that, I mean both cybersecurity sort of broadly, and then the government's approved once, used many times philosophy, which has manifested itself in the Fedramp program. I looked back last week at some of the statements that were made by GSA when they first launched Fedramp 18 months ago or so, about where they expected to be at this point, and compared that to where we are. And I think they would readily admit they're pretty far behind their schedule, but we all know that security and the ability to get approved under the Fedramp program or under FSMA is extremely important as we go forward with our IT, upgrading our IT infrastructure and whatnot. So, Fedramp is moving forward. We had one cloud service provider who received their provisional authorization prior to Christmas, and then just last week we had another cloud service provider who was able to get through the process. So we've got two, according to Steve Van Rokel. When there was one through the process, there were 78 in line behind it. Now there must be 77 in line behind it. A lot of work to be done, but I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts on Fedramp, where we are, the good things about it, and I think there are many, but then where are those areas where there's some work that needs to be done?
So this is Susie. I'd like to take the first stab at that. We commend the federal government for creating Fedramp. We think it's a great program, and I agree. There are many good things about it, and there are some challenges. But I think we're in the process right now, for example, with Fedramp. And if you look at the packages that people are submitting, it really depends on who that cloud service is. Like the larger cloud services, like a Microsoft, a Google, an Amazon, a Salesforce, the packages that we're submitting are pretty daunting in size. I know just the Microsoft Fedramp package, for example, for one of our services is over 900 pages. And that doesn't include the security assessment report, which is more along the lines of 300 pages. And that's frankly a lot to review and to go through. And then when you layer on top of that the fact that you're now looking at a cloud service that is multi-tenant in nature, that spans data centers around the country, it's a very different animal than how we traditionally looked at FSMA packages for systems that were sometimes just a single rack of servers, for example, or two racks of servers in two different data centers for failover. And so while Fedramp, and they admittedly say that they're resource constrained. I think almost every presentation I've seen, they come out and say that publicly. Even if they had all the resources in the world, I think there is a learning curve for anybody reviewing one security packages for a large cloud vendor. All the things, for example, that we do, a lot of the stuff that we do in our data centers is all software based. So whereas you typically see a hardware load balancer, in some situations we might have a software version of that load balancer. And there's a host of different architectures now that people just aren't aware of. And so I think there's a large learning curve as well. So I think in the long run, Fedramp is going to save us a lot of time and money on the vendor side, but I also think it's going to save agencies just a tremendous amount of review time. I mean, imagine each agency having to go and review 1,500-page documents from every major cloud vendor and then keep that up to date year over year. So I think it's a great program. And I think as the major cloud vendors get through the process, I think you'll see the pace at which people can get through Fedramp as everybody kind of goes through that learning curve accelerated at a pretty good clip.
No, and I appreciate those comments, and I think that's right. We've sort of, in working with GSA, tried to encourage them to move these cloud service providers through the process as quickly as possible, and we'll continue to do that because, as you said, I think we want to see the pace increase, and if there are 77 cloud service providers who can offer their services to the federal government, with their provisional authorization through the Fedramp program, that makes for a better competitive environment, and agencies will get a better deal for the taxpayers. So certainly appreciate that. Mike or Kevin, do you have any additional comment on that?
This is Mike. You definitely know I have some perspective on this as kind of the earlier stage company. Often at a lot of these discussions and certainly involved with the SIIA board. Mike knows and others know that I'm kind of the torchbearer for innovation and kind of not leaving that at the side of the trough when everybody's feeding. And some of the same thoughts on kind of the kudos for the concept of Fedramp and kind of one review and benefit to many is obviously applauded. We experience it on the commercial side. Any industry that we serve, like healthcare and financial services, we intentionally sit for certifications on security and best practice management and efficiency and integration with other platforms. We almost have to be able to compete with some of the bigger and larger vendors. One of the challenges with Fedramp, the way it's laid out is, you say if there's now 77 in the pipeline, I'd hazard to say it's moving more towards 777, in the next 6 to 9 months. That is going to be a challenge. I think the resource challenges of kind of reviewing it at a level of sophistication and need is going to tax the JAB teams in really doing that. Also, I think the third-party assessors are going to have some challenges in keeping up with the flow and being able to kind of handle the sheer amount of interest in going through the process from the industry side. That said, I think combined with some of the other progressive ways that cloud reform or mobility or bring your own device, I think putting efforts like the definition of cloud and the use case scenarios and even the road mapping to Fedramp in the hands of NIST was a brilliant move. And it's really allowed industry to play in the decision-making process. So, the other side of the equation to applaud here is the progressive way of kind of looking at defining, just something as simple as, or as basic as cloud computing as a definition for agencies, or what is a cloud broker. I think using NIST as the mechanism for that is an obvious good choice. Now putting the nuts and bolts together on how do you certify behind basic security standards and how do you map it to agency use case scenarios, I think there might be a little bit more opportunity under the IT procurement reform to address the ability for agencies to find innovation and leverage the innovation a little quicker under the centers of excellence concept than having to wait for vendors to go through Fedramp and kind of have that process catch up with it. The net is that the processes are in place. Can they be improved and streamlined? Yes, and I'd say they have to be for the innovation to kind of be there for the agencies. The other unfortunate challenge is that, that concept that I brought up of ecosystem, where vendors are going to be delivering solutions alongside other vendors to meet the need. That is also a challenge when maybe one vendor is going through Fedramp and has that stamp of approval, but maybe another vendor is going through certifications in the commercial sector and is sitting for Fedramp, but do agencies need to wait for both vendors to be on equal par if there is an ecosystem deployment that they need? That will be a challenge that will continue to be out there, but I think the framework is solid. It's based on best practices, not only within the government, but also looking at commercial sector. We're jumping at the bit to go through it, and we look forward to coming out on the other end and the opportunities that are there for a smaller company.
Thanks, Mike. I think that perspective is very helpful for the folks who are on the call with us. Kevin, did you have any additional comments?
Yeah, I think as you think about Fedramp, I have some mixed feelings about it. I think on the one hand, and I think what's important to remember is that the process that it is forcing these service providers through is in many cases probably a lot more rigorous. I would describe it as what the federal government wishes their other applications were like at the end of the day. The continuous monitoring and some of the other elements associated with it are things that aren't done on most, I would venture to say, most government applications and systems today to the same requirements that they're putting the cloud service providers through. So on the one hand, I think the outcome is going to be really, really strong in terms of strengthening the security of these systems that agencies are going to be using. But I think to Mike's point, the rub is it really does hinder the ability for agencies to innovate and be agile, and it really relegates them to kind of being a laggard in terms of adopting these types of technologies when they have these I'll say unintended side effects from a cybersecurity point of view. But perhaps that's just the nature of working in the federal government space.
I appreciate those comments as well. For folks who are on the call, just want to remind you the Fedramp issue is one that we're going to explore in depth at CloudGov next week. we have put together, I think, a really exciting panel to discuss the issue. We've got Kathy Conrad from GSA, who's been one of the leaders in the GSA office pushing the Fedramp program forward. And then we have a representative of Coal-Fire, which is a approved third-party assessor, and some folks from Lockheed Martin who's obviously interested in the process as a cloud service provider. So we sort of got the whole picture, and we're going to go what we keep saying inside Fedramp and understand what's working, what's not. Coal-Fire's been involved in a number of these reviews, and they can touch on the things that Susie talked about, like 900-page applications and things like that. So I think it should be an exciting discussion. So I wanted to plug that as we go through. Other thoughts on some of the things that are going on in the current federal IT marketplace. We spent the better part of the prior 2 years discussing cloud, and Mike talked about it in some of his comments. We've now sort of moved beyond just cloud to this idea that cloud and big data or cloud and data analytics work together to make the government more efficient and effective. Again, part of what we're going to discuss next week is this convergence of cloud and data. There was a NIST conference to discuss the same topic a couple weeks ago up in Gaithersburg. I'd like to get the panelists' thoughts on what's happening from a cloud and data convergence standpoint, and then why does that matter? So I'll throw that open to you all, and give me your thoughts.
Well, this is Mike. I mean, we've hit on it from a couple of different angles and perspectives, but I think one thing that I'm absorbing as we kind of start to see the federal government flex its muscles a little bit as a driver of innovation. I mean, there's no secret. The reason why, the SIIA was looking to kind of put a group like the Public Sector Innovation Group together was, there's a lot of questions and avenues that might be new for agencies and industry to go down together. And I think one thing that we can all kind of look at and applaud is the fact that, for the first time in a long time, again, and I'd say it's happened several times, whether you look at the movement towards client server, or even all the way back to shared services in the old mainframe, where for pure R&D and data sharing, and then the movement towards DARPANET and the internet that spawned the whole commercial, explosion in the 90s. The government was a driver for that, the federal government, and other nations are looking at what the U.S. government is doing now with its movement towards cloud. Bring your own device and mobility plays, virtualization, big data, data analytics, whatever it is. The one thing looking at it now, serving commercial markets and the public sector, is that the opportunity for innovation and for the federal government to be the torchbearer for driving in new directions for IT and technology under a best practices and use case scenarios environment or approach is really compelling. And I've only experienced it twice in my professional career, back to the client server days, and maybe 3 times the internet, and now here with this convergence of technologies that can really bring a difference to bear on cost basis, but also results for taxpayers and constituents. And it really is something that you typically see in the commercial space where profit-driven companies have to reinvent themselves. Here it's happening at a much bigger level with the federal government driving it, and other nations are watching, and that's exciting. So you don't necessarily as a vendor in IT get to play in this many times in your development of your company or in your career. And for us, the challenge is finding the best way for us to sit at the table as an emerging company, and doing it with partners, but doing it with a landscape towards efficiency and doing more with less. I mean, we just haven't built our business around that, so it's kind of coming to us. We were early for it when we came out of the gate, but it's exciting to see it finally happening. And in the public sector space, whether it be federal, state and local. We're actually seeing quicker movement on the state and local and municipal level because the procurement challenges and hurdles are not as significant. So it's exciting, number one, and you know, who knows where it's going to go, but I think there's a nice progression unfolding in front of us.
Yeah, this is Susie. Big data to me is just super interesting. If you look at just the rate of data explosion, it's pretty astonishing. I think according to the IDC, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think the rate of digital information and the pace at which it's growing is 10 times every 5 years. So if you think of all that data, right, that's out there, 85% of that new data is coming from all different types of data. Different data types, things like sensors, RFID, social networking, and the types of analytics on data that can be recorded and be data mined from social sites to better understand, for example, how citizens are interacting with government websites. And I think and then couple that with just the technology, with technologies like Hadoop. Right, that now is the open source, kind of the open source way of going and looking at big data, and even the adoption of Hadoop by major companies, even Microsoft. We now give customers the ability to do things that with Hadoop that you can in a couple of days that would have taken a couple of months, right, to actually stand up and do it in a very cost-effective manner, and then tie that back to very simple to use analytic tools that people know that no one uses every day, things like Excel. Right, to just go in and actually look at this information and then do something meaningful with that information, whether you're a federal agency or whether you're a private sector company who wants to just better interact with their customers. And so it is when we look at big data, it's not, most people think big data and they think, oh, there's just some big database out there, but it is really a whole different way of kind of looking at information and garnering something important, right, or useful from that data and making associations between that data. And I think the federal government agencies are just starting to tap into this and starting to realize how it might help them serve citizens better with information they already own. And I guess the other flip side of this is if you look at what the federal government has done in the past with some of the data sets that are out there that have actually helped build very large industries. When you look at GPS coordinates and information, right? Entire industries were born out of some of this government data that should be publicly available, being readily available. And now, because of the decreasing cost of storage and the ability to do things like put these large data sets out in the cloud for very little, if any, fees or charges, very minimal charges, and allow people to kind of build mashups on this data, it's just very exciting, right, for us to be able to kind of do this in today's technology age.
I think that's a really good point. The interesting thing to me, and you touched on it, Susie, in that answer is, there's really two things. There's big data, and then there's the opening of that big data to citizen developers. And I think one of the real fascinating things that we see with open data as a result of how we collect it and how much information we've collected is the ability, particularly at the state and local level, for citizen developers to get their hands on that data and then build sort of real-world applications that will tell you, what the on-time percentage of bus 18E is, so that folks can track that and make sure they get to work or school or whatever it may be on time. And I think, obviously there is almost unlimited application for data given the way we're collecting it now. And of course, and I don't want to get into this on this call, but it opens up the privacy discussion, as we all know, and that's something that as data becomes more open, we're going to need to deal with the privacy aspects of it and personally identifiable information and all those things that go along with it. So there's certainly more to come. I actually heard the phrase this morning, smart data, which is, I think, a sort of interesting way of thinking about big data, because it's not just big anymore. It's also useful, and maybe that makes it smart. So I'll throw over to Kevin if you have any comment on this topic, and if not, we'll scoot forward to another topic.
I just have a quick comment, which is I think one of the key trends that we're seeing, I don't know if it's intentional or just a side effect of what's going on, is the movement towards data portability, and that really gives government a lot of flexibility in terms of how it builds its applications, how it leverages the data that it has. And the more we see trends towards like cloud computing, and it really does open up possibilities and ways for applications to interact at a transaction level that before were locked in these highly proprietary systems. And I think that's one of the big advantages that government gets out of this, is a tremendous amount of flexibility associated with the portability of the data that we're seeing kind of emerge in a lot of the systems that they're implementing.
Now, Kevin, are you seeing much in the way of funding going to support some? And I know we have obviously a big data initiative, which is funded, but not at a super high level. Are you seeing trends that say we're going to see additional funding, additional opportunities around big data, or is it just sort of doing what you can with the resources that we have now?
Well, this might come out a bit cynical, but I think we're going to be seeing a lot of things called big data that really aren't. They're just data and analytics. But certainly, I do think we're going to see, as the tools that are available, much like a few years ago when the geographic information tools and the mapping tools became so prevalent and consumer oriented, we're going to see data analytics tools that are more accessible and affordable to a lot of different uses that they weren't in the past. And I think that really unlocks a lot of possibilities for agencies in terms of making use of their data and leveraging that for making better decisions.
Okay. Thanks for that. Any further comments from anyone else on the panel about big data?
I think it's something where if agencies aren't really thinking about what it means for them and how they could kind of implement solutions around utilizing big data, they could maybe go down some dead-end roads that they weren't expecting. Kevin's point about stuff being called big data that is more reporting and analytics and business intelligence and knowledge management is going to be a challenge. I think we saw the same thing with cloud. Is a lot of people basically slapped a marketing message behind something they were already delivering and kind of tried to call it cloud, and I think that's going to be there no matter what. I mean, we as industry players are going to try and work with whatever we think the customer is moving towards and trending towards. But I think at the end of the day, a use case approach with a very measured, I don't like to say ROI when it's in the public sector, but with a very measured evaluation of results is going to be critical for agencies to understand and implement. It's going to be a challenge to implement, particularly with multiple vendors being tasked likely with solving the problem or the challenge. An opportunity for us as vendors, if we can work together more than we ever have and kind of condition our systems to do it well, but also understand the privacy and the security concerns, good opportunities for us and better opportunities for the agencies and the constituents. Your one topic of kind of, the security side and where will appropriations or investments be made in it. I think you're seeing some of that, particularly with maybe one of the set-asides that has kind of been put in place for cybersecurity. There's a cybersecurity excellence center that was just established in NIST that really dovetailed with kind of the cloud computing approach and the big data and the Fedramp activities. It's another very good step in kind of tying it all together. And whether there's similar appropriations or dollars that are invested from a NSF research and development perspective, I think you're going to see that, and it's necessary to kind of help agencies and industry meet on some common ground. And I think with more and more efficiencies being eked out in the agency's perspective, I'd like to see on the procurement reform a little bit more ability for the CIOs to kind of manage their own surplus, if you will. And if they're lucky enough to create one budget-wise, why not? Let them invest it in their own centers of excellence or use case scenarios that look at innovation and give them some incentive if they're saving the dollars that they're expected to. So, a lot of perspectives there, but I think it's certainly going to be an interesting landscape moving forward.
Thanks, Mike, for adding to that. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I know we have one big topic that we wanted to touch on. I wanted to remind folks, if you have specific questions that you'd like us to address, if you could use the text chat to raise those questions with us. We'll monitor them here over the next few minutes as we talk about this last topic and try to get to all those questions before we wrap up. I know just in looking at the list that came in, there was one question about a list of Fedramp applicants. I don't believe, and you guys jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that GSA has published a list of Fedramp applicants. They certainly keep track of the 15 or so third-party assessment organizations, and you can get that on the GSA website at gsa.gov. There's also a list now of the 2 companies that have received their provisional authority to operate through the Fedramp program, and that's at, I think, the Fedramp site. So, you can certainly check those out. The reason I know the number 78 that I threw around earlier is because I heard Steve Van Rokel mention it once up at the NIST conference a couple weeks ago, and then again at the ISA IT reform hearing, I guess a week and a half ago. So that's where that number comes from. I don't have confirmation of it other than that's what I heard. But a good segue to the last topic that I wanted to have our panel discuss, which is the idea of procurement reform. Obviously, those of us on this call and those listening in understand that federal procurement is an acquired taste. It's a long, hard process. It takes a rather significant investment of time and resources, and as a result, there are some companies that simply shy away from the market, and those that don't often find themselves struggling to remain competitive. I would venture to say that a lot of what the Obama administration has done, whether it's through Cloud First or the digital government strategy or some of the move towards strategic sourcing and stuff like that they have pushed, is really designed to try to make it so that we can acquire information technology, goods and services quicker. Certainly the move to email that we talked about earlier and those sorts of things, very effective at getting technology into the hands of government and in turn making government more efficient. But now we have the proposal by Congressman Issa to reform the 1996 Clinger-Cohen Act. It wants, in that legislation, which he hasn't introduced, I don't believe yet, but he will be shortly, he wants to empower CIOs, give them budget authority. He talks about a lot about commodity IT and how one buys commodity IT. He talks about strategic sourcing and things like the use of cloud brokers and a host of other things to try to speed up the federal acquisition process. So we've been very involved in this issue. As I mentioned at the outset, Congressman Issa will provide the afternoon keynote at CloudGov, so we hope to have some additional information from him there. We'll be discussing that policy as well as part of a panel. But thoughts on what ISA has proposed, and then and maybe not, if you don't want to get into the specifics of the legislation, thoughts on the need to speed up the federal IT acquisition process, make it simpler, and that in turn opens the market to more participants. So I'll throw that to Susie and Kevin and Mike.
Well, this is Kevin. I'll be happy to take a first bite at this one. I guess to highlight the legislation, it actually is a rather long list of changes and proposed reforms, and in some cases reporting requirements that would be pretty far-reaching. And it's not just about acquisition; it's also about IT management. I mean, it dictates the size of data centers. It talks about agency data center consolidation plans. It talks about, as you mentioned already, the increased responsibility of the CIO. It gives the CIO council more authority, or at least describes more authority. I guess my perspective, if some of the things in it are valuable and useful to be in a piece of legislation, other things like dictating what the size of a data center is seem a bit odd to be in legislation. That seems more of a policy matter and something you'd want to be flexible. And if you put something like that in law, I mean, who knows what the size of a data center is going to be in 5 years from now? We could have it all fitting in, in a tiny closet, smaller than a bathroom closet. So I think there's some things in there that are valuable. I think the expanding role and budget authority for the CIO, to me, that's one of the biggest reasons that we have the challenges that we have today, is because the CIO, the person who's ostensibly responsible for IT, in many cases doesn't have responsibility for IT. They just have policy guidance and responsibility for it, but they don't actually handle the purchasing and the management of the systems in some cases. So that feels like a good and valuable change. Some of the other things that are in there feel like they're outside the bounds of what should be dealt with in legislation. And I think we're going to see substantial reforms to the legislation. And I still also think there's a fairly high degree of chance this is not going to go anywhere.
Thanks, Kevin. I certainly, all of the things that you just said are very true, and it'll be interesting to see how the legislation is revised based on the conversations that Chairman Issa and his staff have had with industry. And like I said, we've been involved. I've had his staff over twice to talk about it. We've made some, I think, very significant recommendations on things they change, and hopefully they're willing to listen, because otherwise I think your last point is probably on the money, which is if they don't make changes to bring industry along, it's going to be very difficult for them to get industry support behind this legislation.
One thing, let me just add one thing to that, which I think is interesting to note, is many of the initiatives that are in that legislation are initiatives that are already in place within the Office of Management and Budget around the IT policy. So it seems to take, in many respects, it seems to take some of the policies that are already in place, like, as I mentioned, data center consolidation. We already have goals and targets for that it's seeking to kind of put into legislation, which it seems oddly in agreement with given the two political parties that are involved in that. But from that point of view, it does seem to support and provide additional underpinning to the policies that the Obama administration has been pursuing from an IT point of view. But I think this just seems in some respects to go a little too far relative to what it's trying to accomplish, and being a little bit too explicit in dictating management to IT leaders through legislation versus just setting in place a foundation for them to operate in.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And you mentioned the data center consolidation. There's a number of bills dealing with data center consolidation floating around. But the ISO draft legislation that we saw last year, it has a Fedramp program, for lack of a better word, which would be codified in the legislation as well. So it's interesting, and your point is well taken. Mike, Binko, or Susie, do you have any thoughts on that? We've got about 5 minutes left, and I don't.
Yeah, this is Susie. I agree that it does seem that many of the things called out in the legislation seem to be directly tied to policies that OMB has already put out. You mentioned data center consolidation. They mentioned duplication of IT systems in the back office, and I know that, for example, Steve Emmerkles has something called portfolio stat, where he's basically going around and meeting with each agency, and they're reviewing the portfolio of IT systems and kind of giving them a grade to make sure that there's not duplication among these systems, and then also trying to better understand how agencies can actually share similar like systems across the board, which again seems to be in line with what at least the the general theme of the legislation seems to be. When I look at, you know, and I guess the one thing that I don't think they really call out as clearly as maybe I would like to see in the legislation is really about just the management of the existing IT systems. Because what we're finding a lot when we go in and talk to agencies is that you know, not every legacy system it's not a rip and replace type of world. One for budgets, I think we mentioned that earlier in the call, where sometimes you have to spend some money, right, to be able to do innovative things from a technology perspective, and that's a challenge right now with budgets. But what we are finding is that by just going in and looking at the existing IT systems that are there and coming up with kind of a plan to better manage those particular systems, whether it be, for example, from a desktop management perspective, adding a layer of automation that could help perhaps eliminate some of the human capital resources that are required to just manage a help desk, can greatly, or can save, you know, a particular agency, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, even when they don't have, you know, the budget maybe to do something super innovative at the current moment. And so I think there's a lot that can be done with what they have today, as well as looking at ways to do things like move from CapEx to OpEx, right, as we move to the cloud, and try to offset some of those things, which all go along the lines of the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative and those types of things. So we think there is a lot that agencies can actually do today to help them just manage what they already have, and to evaluate, you know, just to do an inventory, for example, of their IT systems, to know if they are, as they go into a procurement process, to know if they are going out and purchasing a capability that they might already own in another group inside that agency or in a sub-agency. And we're finding that they don't even know that, and so in a lot of instances. And so there are probably some just simple processes that could be put in place that could really help people wrap their arms around what they have today, how can they manage that more efficiently, and then how can they, as they go into the procurement process, make sure that they're procuring innovative technologies that kind of complement their IT portfolio today.
Okay, Mike, any further comment?
Yeah, I know we only have about 2 minutes, but you know, just one quick thought and perspective, more for the CIOs within the agencies and their staffs and directorates. I mean, you know, Kevin hit it. You know, the biggest picture question is like arguing truth. You know, is it even going to really have the intended impact? I mean, you know, jury's still out on that one, and I think the component pieces still need to be wrangled a little bit as far as the implementation. You know, honestly, Susie, you hit it on the head. It is more of an opportunity for the CIOs to put on I hate to say it this way, but a business analyst hat. And if they're not retooling their teams or adding to their teams with that analyst approach to operations, it's an economic model more than a technological shift. And I think that's where the commercial sector that we're seeing understands that intimately. If they can do more with less, improve operational best practices with a fair amount of transparency and risk mitigation in play, that's going to help improve their bottom line. For the agencies, it's all about delivering better government to the constituencies at a lower cost point. If they're not looking at the opportunity to retool their teams and stop and assess what they currently have in place, you know, good assets, keep them in place, but you got to know which are the good assets and the good IT models and platforms that you can build on and leverage. And, you know, we as a vendor have to make sure that we can link into legacy IT. And I'll be honest with you, not every partner that we look at or not every, you know, vendor out there has an approach where they can leverage existing IT assets and extend it forward. So just looking at the cloud first perspective or the cloud migration, which is kind of where we cut our teeth, that ability for the agencies to kind of stop, think about it, and then map out metrics of success and evaluation as they implement new IT, that's absolutely critical. But it's going to be something that almost is required of them if they're going to be sitting at the budget and procurement tables that they want to be at and have that responsibility in their stable as opposed to a CFO for the agency or a finance team.
Okay. Appreciate those comments. I want to first thank everyone for participating. I think it's been a lively discussion. Certainly a lot of issues out there in federal IT that are going to continue to change and evolve over the next 12, 18, 24 months as the Obama administration moves forward with their broad range of initiatives, and as Congress steps into this debate a little bit through what Chairman Issa is doing, and probably others who will get involved as well. But I want to thank our panelists, Susie Adams, Kevin Plexico, and Mike Binko for their participation in this. I want to thank our partner Deltek for their role in helping us promote this, as well as helping us promote CloudGov. I'll put up on the screen real quick the two housekeeping matters that I raised at the beginning. All About the Cloud is May 7th through 9th in San Francisco, early bird pricing through the beginning of April, and the call for speakers, which closes this Friday, February 8th. And then again, to touch on CloudGov, the CloudGov conference is next Tuesday, February 12th at the Westin in Washington, D.C. Keynotes from Steve Van Rokel, Dave DeVries, and Daryl Issa, as well as I think 6 panel discussions on a variety of topics, including many of the areas that we touched on today. With that, if I don't have any panelists who would like to add any closing remarks or any questions from our attendees, we will call our SIIA webinar on 2013 IT predictions and plans closed.
Looking forward to a lively discussion next week or in 2 weeks at the conference.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Please stand by.